Alright, let's put this face up. I had it right before. I looked wrong because the name was on the bottom of the box instead of the top. Mohawk. All Design Council. They made, I think, 3 games total. I own 2 of them. The other one is my favorite Hannibal game of all, in terms of kind of strategic, flavored stuff, far and away. And this is a hell of a challenge for Wilderness War, actually. I know Gil Collins actually prefers this for historical basis, I think, compared to Wilderness War. I'll give you this much. It gives you a very, very good, and you should watch Gil's videos. He does great, analysis. Doesn't bother with the playthrough on screen usually, but he has a lot of historical knowledge, especially about the North American era. He's the designer of Mr. Madison's War. Based on his recommendation and also Judd's recommendation, and, well, hey, it's an Aulic game. I loved the one, and it's, another one of these. This one very much came onto my radar, and I said, I want to play this. It's not without flaws. So let me go into a couple of these. The first is the rule book. The rule book is a bit of a mess. It's, things are not necessarily organized terribly well. Things aren't always spoken out clearly. I'm still not sure of certain rules, like whether defensive fire is supposed to come before or simultaneous with offensive fire. I'm leaning towards defensive fire having the advantage, but most of that doesn't really matter. The counters are pretty crappy. I learned at least that I'm not missing some, as I was fearing, that there's just misprints in either the rules or the counter mix. I'm not sure which. The board, somewhat, but it looks like it was drawn by a 6-year-old. It really does. And there's something maybe kind of charming about that, but it's hard sometimes to figure out whether you can move from point A to point B. This is a point-to-point system. On the other hand, man, this is a lot prettier, even for being drawn by a 6-year-old, than your average bubble map with all its lines. 6 on one hand, half a dozen on the other, right? Do you want the aesthetic pleasure of a map that represents itself, kind of naturally, or do you want one that's a little bit more functional? I prefer this to the bold bubble map in terms of appearance, and I also prefer it to the muted bubble map. And actually, I think this is actually easier to discern what's going on. However, here's one thing. This is really a naturalistic representation of what the war in North America was like. There were pathways, mainly rivers and main roads. The Indian trails, yeah, they're sort of an abstraction. Okay. The other thing that I really dislike about it has to do with gameplay, and that is the tactical combat. You play tactical combat out in these little areas, and they give you different terrain, and the different terrain gives you different bonuses, different depending on the types of troops, and that's all great. The problem with it is, it's a buckets of dice type system. You're aligning your forces up against the enemy, and you're rolling against them looking for 6s. That gives you a lot of decisions to break off combat, a lot of opportunity, but far too often you end up saying, "Oh yeah, I wanna fight this to the end," and it just takes too long. You're rolling dice and rolling dice and rolling dice, and I don't know if it bugs me more solo or opposed. Both bug the shit out of me. It certainly bugs me a lot on camera solo. I think it bugs me less in pure solo than it does in opposed games. So if I'm sitting down at a game with someone, we're just rolling and rolling and rolling. It just feels absolutely ridiculous. Whereas you know, if and I have this problem with things like Britannia too, which had the same situation where two people both want to fight in the space, and they're willing to take the odds disadvantage. Nobody's willing to retreat, but it's really low chance of any victory, so they roll 5 or 6 times. Well, here, eventually, superior firepower is going to win out. And you do have an option to withdraw because of those lousy to hit numbers. It would take a somewhat more subtle and complicated design to allow people to withdraw from combat, kind of like many of the CDGs and more modern designs have. That make you make a roll to get out of combat instead of the, hey, I'm going to force you to take some potential losses and then you're going to fight. But in terms of the operational and strategic side of things, I really like the way this kind of presents the challenge to the French and the English. That's very asymmetrical and sometimes really heart-wrenching decisions as to, do I go for the win or do I try to prevent the loss? Do I have a chance of the win? And the threat of the automatic win for the French is so strong that they're able to tie down British troops without really risking their own fully, without fully committing to trying to win. So there's some really nice aspects to the actual play of the operational strategic side of the game. It also looks to me like it probably is going to come down to the wire a lot of times. There's the chance that the French are going to pull off an early automatic victory, but that's pretty slim. Even if they go all out for it, they're only improving their chances a little bit, and they're really throwing away the forces they're going to need for the long-term defense. On the other hand, if the British are going for the victory, I obviously didn't do as well as perhaps I could have. But they've got to really kind of work on pushing their territories forward. In particular, they've got to get some kind of establishment on Lake Ontario to threaten Fort Frontenac and Montreal, or get themselves lodged in Quebec earlier. I managed to do it, but then got driven back out. There's definitely a fine balance there. I don't know. There may be an unbalance after many plays that you can find out, but it feels like it is going to be, there's enough luck, etc., that it's going to go down to the wire in most games. Okay. The historicity of the combat. So again, I go back to the little tactical boards. What's wrong with them is actually this sort of feeling that this is the impression that this is a single battle. The way around that is turns are pretty much a half year each. Sometimes they're a whole year, but I think that's meant to indicate a half year that, of campaigning. Just because the war didn't get fully geared up and ended early. If you don't look at these as though there's some single battle, at the siege is probably the hardest part to that, but if you look at it as, but elsewhere, if you look at it as a series of conflicts, and some of them maybe not with the troops, but some of them being attrition factors and stuff like that, just by maneuvering troops in the same area, it makes a little more sense. If you try to take the conceit that the game almost, pushes on you in terms of the imagery of this little battlefield, it kind of feels more like you're seeing these huge Napoleonic battles, which A, didn't happen, and B, that the losses are just way too high. These forces should be stumbling back in somewhat disarray. Now, some of that is up to the players. The players could play it out and withdraw when they're kind of losing and just take that. And if they do that, it'll play a little bit more historically feeling. But here's another thing. If you commit to engaging in an area, forces tended to dissolve in this era. Not so much from the combat, but through... So here's the problem, is that it's really through attrition. And there's no real attrition in the game except as exposed by the combat factor. So you got to kind of, project away and say, well, if there's no enemy in the area, sure, there's attrition going on, and it may be very heavy, but if the enemy wants to get up there and contest you, he's going to be suffering the same kind of attrition. So, he'll have forces. It's all very abstracted, and it works. And yes, with a little bit of hand-waving, I can buy it. I think it holds up there. The problem is that it might give someone this kind of impression that's incorrect. And I always hate when a game, especially a simple game, gives a wrongful impression. You should hear me how I went off on Struggle of Empires for that particular reason. Well, it's mainly because the people playing it may not be very familiar with the era. And truly, when you're looking at something like 7 Years' War in America, there may be plenty of people playing them who aren't terribly familiar with the era. Now, I'm not terribly familiar with any era, but I know enough about this one to know that how the battles seem to portray isn't reality, and then you have to say, well, okay, there's abstraction going on. But the problem with that, of course, is in my little 6 pages of rule book, one of which is the cover. I hate fold-out rule books, but blessed be the fact that this is so short, because it is really terrible for the size. It feels like you can figure everything out, but anyway, where were we? When a game is simple enough to be, appealing to maybe younger kids, and I think this one and Hannibal are, there is the danger that they're going to give you some kind of wrong lessons about the extent of the battles that you're seeing on the field and such. Such is life. It would be nice if there were some notes to handle it, and that is definitely a grump for me. Just a portrayal, even if you can kind of excuse it, from a more experienced wargamer perspective. So what else can I say about it? I can't really think of anything. I'm not going to compare it to Wilderness War. I don't think it does. I mean, I think Wilderness War is a significantly more complex game that there's room for both of these in your collection. They both seem like very good competitive games, and they both seem to cover the history to a decent degree. I wouldn't replace one with the other. But I'd say this, if you're looking at playing, a shortened campaign of Wilderness War, which most of the tournament people do, you might be better off pulling this thing out. I think, I don't know, I think there are some pretty tough decisions in this one. They're of a different nature, though. You're not memorizing a deck. You're not trying to, manipulate the cards or anything like that. The rule set's a lot simpler to grasp, though. And, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck out of it. The negative side, way too much die rolling. Some weird stuff. So I really love the naval up here, where you're, just the idea of how important that is. Controlling the naval aspect to getting your reinforcements and such not, and getting your troops capable of operating in the New World. But the problem is, this really does end up just a pure guessing game. It is a game of Rochambeau. Early on, there's a little tiny piece of, Louisbourg kind of lets me say, I might want to try to slip something better in there than I could get otherwise. I think I would enjoy that little game while Louisbourg's in it. It's kind of like, well, I don't know. Sometimes those decisions can just be painful. It's kind of like when you're playing something like Empires and Arms. and you have the chit selection. And the chit selection actually means something. You know, the outflank does something different. Wow, what's all this? I think these are photocopies out of the rules. I have an errata set. Shit, I wish I had noticed that. I should always look through the whole box. It looks like I mostly got things right. The burn markers. So you can destroy the circled red spots, and I thought that was the case, and I probably should have considered that when the Indians would take something like Boston. They could have converted it to a more defensible place. What I'm confused about is the difference between maps 3 and 4. Now, we never saw anything fighting in the clearing. So little clearing. But they don't ask, they ask specifically, when is map 5, the landing, used, and they give the answers to that, which makes sense. Oh, missed something here. When you use waterway movement into an enemy space, you fight on the landing for 1 round as well. And I didn't play that out. But anyway, yeah, I'm very impressed with this and very happy that I picked it up. I think it's well worth, you know, I was counting on 25 plus shipping. Got it for 35. It's rare. It's hard to find, but you know, so far as I'm concerned, all you know, 2 for 2. Their other game I think is a World War II type game, so I'll probably stay away from that. I've never seen anybody selling it or anything, so it may be the rarest of the bunch. Maybe I'm mistaken though. Maybe they don't have 3 games. Is there another company I'm thinking of? I may be thinking of Panther Games here having a 3rd one. This may be the only 2 Olive games, but they're both very, very good light games with a little bit of this die rolling crap in them. And I would strongly suggest, if you have any interest in the kind of lighter, you know, I want to say almost war game, but these guys are such good simulations that they're just light war games. I mean, there's nothing I'll say, well, they're kind of wimp games in the sense that maybe you could get somebody who's not too into war games to play them. But their historical basis seems very, very sound in both cases. And that's important to me, you know, to provide it at such a light level seems pretty impressive, actually. All right. Definitely liking this one.